Recorded live at the center of the Earth. This is Robots from Tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg, glad to have you with us. Before we get too far into things, if you listen to the show and like what we do here, the best way to follow us is over at multiversitycomics.com. Multiversity Comics is a great way to stay informed about the wide world of comics. The site is updated multiple times a day with all manner of news, reviews, interviews, other podcasts like Make Mine Multiversity, the DC3 Cast, and much more. There's a pretty good chance every time you head over to multiversitycomics.com, you'll find something new. You can also check out our full episode archive over at robotsfromtomorrow.libsyn.com. It's the only place you can find all of our 800 plus episodes categorized and completely free. We have a YouTube channel with videos of current episodes and a growing number of episodes from our back catalog. And you can follow us on Blue Sky as at rftpodcast.bsky.social. Today's episode is going to be on the short side as I am putting the final touches on a new type of episode that should be debuting next week, fingers crossed. But I thought this would be a good time to, like the episode title says, say a few words on the topic of team-ups. It was recently announced that Marvel and DC were finally reprinting a large portion of their crossover comics in two large omnibus collections. Coming out the first week of August are the DC vs. Marvel Omnibus and DC Marvel The Amalgam Age Omnibus. What do they collect? Well, according to the solicitation copy, DC vs. Marvel Omnibus collects, in alphabetical order with creator info added, John Byrne's Batman and Captain America, Alan Grant and Eduardo Barreto's Batman Daredevil, Denny O'Neil and Barry Kitson's Batman Punisher Lake of Fire, J.M. DeMatteis and Graham Nolan's Batman Spider-Man, D.G. Chichester and Scott McDaniel's Daredevil Batman, DC Special Series number 27, which, of course, is Len Wein and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez's Batman vs. the Incredible Hulk, John Byrne's Darkseid vs. Galactus The Hunger, Ron Mars and Darryl Banks' Green Lantern Silver Surfer Unholy Alliances, Roger Stern and Steve Rude's Incredible Hulk vs. Superman. Marvel and DC present featuring the Uncanny X-Men and the New Teen Titans by, of course, Chris Claremont and Walt Simonson. Marvel Treasury Edition number 28, which is Jim Shooter and John Buscema's Spider-Man and Superman. Chuck Dixon and John Romita Jr.'s Punisher Batman Deadly Knights. George Perez and Ron Lim's Silver Surfer Superman. J.M. DeMatteis and Mark Bagley's Spider-Man and Batman. Jerry Conway and Ross Andrews' Superman vs. the Amazing Spider-Man. And finally, Dan Jurgens' Superman Fantastic Four. Moving on to the other book, DC Marvel The Amalgam Age Omnibus, we have DC vs. Marvel 1 through 4, DC Marvel All Access 1 through 4, Unlimited Access 1 through 4, and almost all of the Amalgam one-shots that were, of course, stories from a universe where DC and Marvel characters were merged into combined versions. Those one-shots include Bat-Thing, Bruce Wayne Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Bullets and Bracelets, Challengers of the Fantastic, Doctor Strange Fate, Iron Lantern, Legends of the Dark Claw, Lobo the Duck, Speed Demon, Spider-Boy, Super Soldier, Thorian of the New Asgods, and X-Patrol. The solicitation goes on to say, quote, "in more, plus a treasure trove of behind-the-scenes material." I'm going to assume that includes the other 9 Amalgam one-shots. There has been an announcement that the Amalgam one-shots JLX and Magneto and the Magnetic Men will not be included, most likely due to the royalty payments that would be required to be sent to their writer, convicted sex offender Gerard Jones. So these are nearly complete collections. Now, Vince Ostrowski and I have talked about the 2 Superman-Spider-Man crossovers on part 2 of our Greatest Bronze Age Superman series. And there's a good chance we'll talk about the Batman Incredible Hulk comic sometime in the not-so-distant future. I've talked about the X-Men Teen Titans comic on Multiversity Comics, and to anyone who will listen at the drop of a hat. So my other thoughts on these books in particular, they are as follows, in no particular order. I think it's hysterical that the DC vs. Marvel miniseries isn't actually included in the DC vs. Marvel Omnibus. I mean, I know why, but it still makes me chuckle. I wonder if the Green Lantern Silver Surfer one-shot will be referenced in the Amalgam book, because its ending ties directly into the DC vs. Marvel miniseries, which is also written by Ron Mars. Some of the comics in the DC vs. Marvel Omnibus were made for different trim sizes, aka Treasury editions. So having them in the same volume as regularly trimmed comics can make for an awkward reading experience at times. For the Treasury comics, you'll have a lot more white space above and below the art for those comics, ironically making the originally larger stories now smaller than their originally smaller counterparts. We'll see how this is handled in the eventual books. This, of course, is not all of the comics published as DC Marvel crossovers. You could easily do a third omnibus, not even counting the JLA Avengers story. So here's a rough idea of what another omnibus of the uncollected material could look like. You could have Peter David and Stuart Immonen's Spider-Man Gen 13, Kevin Maguire's FF Gen 13, James Robinson and Salvador Larroca's Gen X Gen 13, Brandon Choi and Art Adams Gen 13 Gen X, Larry Hama and Steve Epting's Team X Team 7, Wildcats X-Men 1 through 4 by Scott Lobdell, James Robinson, Warren Ellis, Travis Charest, Jim Lee, Adam Hughes, and Matt Broom et al. Aaron Weisenfeld's Deathblow Wolverine 1 and 2, World War III, which was the James Robinson written Heroes Reborn issue 13s for all 4 of the Heroes Reborn titles. And of course, for completeness' sake, one cannot leave out the seminal work, Brett Booth's Backlash Spider-Man number 1 and 2. I mean, you could, but who'd want to? As I mentioned before, there's JLA Avengers itself. There was a charity reprinting for the Hero Initiative back in 2022, but there's no reason the book can't be back in print now that there seems to be a détente between Marvel and DC. Could we see an announcement of that at some point? Now, what about the digital versions? Nowadays, very few of these releases don't end up with some type of digital version, either still collected or split up into the individual comics on one digital platform or another. Since DC seems to be handling these books, did they get the dibs on these comics? Maybe that's why we haven't seen anything on JLA Avengers or those other joint Marvel-DC comics, because Marvel has the rights. So that's a few things to keep in mind on the Marvel-DC crossover front as we get closer and closer to the release of these two behemoth collections. But what about the other team-ups? The ones nobody talks about anymore. The forgotten team-ups. The lost team-ups. Sure, we all remember Superman Spider-Man or X-Men Teen Titans. But what about Roger Rabbit and Dick Tracy? The JLA and Warlock fighting Thanos? Firestorm and the Hulk, or Rom and the Legion of Superheroes. An April Fool's joke, you say? Sure, this episode is coming out on April 1st, but these comics are no joke. Well, not really. Those team-ups, and almost 5,000 more, are the creation of Ross Pearsall, whose Super Team Family, the Lost Issues blog, has been posting covers for imaginary issues of team-up comics for almost 14 years at this point. Averaging a new cover almost every day, starting back in 2010, Ross started making new Brave and the Bold covers for issues featuring team-ups he wished had been done during the comic's original run. After 212 covers, he switched over to Marvel 2-in-1, now pairing Ben Grimm with folks from all 4 corners of the comics and pop culture world. After 188 of those covers, he went back to Batman and more Brave and the Bold. And after another 105 issues, Ross decided to use a new template series with a wider range and picked DC's old Super Team Family, which lacked a recurring central character and thus gave him more flexibility. This title stuck, with Ross continuing it to this day and publishing issue 4,370 as I record this. Now, let me say that again. Issue 4,370. And let me say this. Comics companies usually say something like, the team up you never expected, when advertising these sorts of things on their covers and such. And, while some of them can be kind of surprising, they're almost never that surprising. Is it surprising that Spider-Man teams up with Dr. Doom, or Batman and the Joker collaborated on a case together? Maybe. But they're both owned by the same company, so it's not that out of left field. Now, intercompany crossovers can push that envelope a little bit, but not too much. I always joke that a team-up I never expected was Spider-Man and Jesus, although Ghost Rider and Jesus did happen. Shh, don't tell anybody. But Ross, I don't think he's paired anyone up with the Son of Man, but beyond that, he's covered a lot of ground. Thankfully, his website has a random cover picker, so let me just dial up a few more of these while I'm sitting here. We have Batman and Abe Sapien, The Falcon and Black Lightning, Sherlock Holmes and the Spectre, Roger Rabbit and Animal Man, John Wayne and Django. Yes, Django and Jane Django. The Bill Bixby, Lou Ferrigno Hulk and John Wesley Ships Flash. Emma Peel, Batgirl and Lieutenant Uhura, guest starring Harry Mudd. Judge Dredd and Jonah Hex in a story called Judge, Jury, and Hexecutioner. Daredevil and Usagi Yojimbo. Oh, and of course, The Flash and Flash Gordon, which he actually did twice, once with Barry Allen and once with Jake Eric. I could go on and on and on, but I think you get the idea. Why do these work so well? Like the era of the series they are inspired by, each of these covers are built around a story idea, and they have their own narrative built into them. Pearsall has a real knack for hitting just the right tone in his cover copy and story titles and cover dialogue, all of which really helps sell his ideas. I mean, they're not all going to be winners, but man, oh man, is his average really, really high. And another thing I like about his site, which is over at braveandboldlost.blogspot.com, is the fact that each cover is tagged not only by character, but also by artist. So I can easily hop from his 29 Judge Dredd covers to his 44 Paul Smith covers to his Imp Probable cover, which of course features the Imp Probable team of Batmite, Mr. Impossible, Mr. Mxyzptlk, the Bamf, the Great Gazoo, and Mr. Hanky, the Christmas Pooh, in just a few clicks, which is really, really helpful when, again, you've got almost 5,000 covers to look through. So there you have it. There's your Easter chocolate comics recommendation. Go check out Ross Pearsall's Super Team Family, The Lost Issues, at braveandboldlost.blogspot.com, and I'll be back next week with even more comics talk. So stay safe, enjoy those funny books, and I'll catch you next time.